My sister handed me a DNA test for my birthday like it was a joke, like it was a toy. She laughed so everyone could hear and said, "Maybe this will explain why you're another man's mistake in this family." I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, but something in my chest cracked anyway. I took it home, mailed it in, and told myself I'd survive whatever came back. What I didn't expect was the timing. Months later, our family's estate lawyer called for an urgent meeting, and he didn't say it was about money. He said it was about me. And when my mother and my sister heard that, their faces went pale. That's when I realized the DNA test wasn't the punchline. It was the trigger. My name is Cole Caldwell. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. And if you've ever been the one treated like an afterthought in your own home, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you think, and it tells me I'm not alone. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. The quiet life I built in Portland was never about being trendy or minimal for the sake of it. It was survival, clean counters, neutral walls, a calendar that ran like a metronome, a job where numbers behaved the way people never did. I'm Cole Caldwell, early 30s financial analyst, the guy who leaves parties first and texts back late because silence feels safer than the wrong words. I learned a long time ago that the easiest way to stay out of trouble in my family was to take up as little space as possible, smile when you're supposed to, speak only when spoken to, be the background, let the louder people feel like the room belongs to them. That was the unspoken rule in the Caldwell house: perfection on the outside, frost on the inside. If you looked from the street, our place in Greenwich, Connecticut was exactly what people imagine when they hear old money: symmetry, stone, a driveway that looked like it had never seen a fallen leaf. But the warmth didn't live there. It visited sometimes like a guest who forgot their coat and left early. My mother, Mary Ann, ran that house the way some people run a brand. Everything had a correct angle. Everything had a correct story. The stories mattered more than the feelings underneath them. If you asked her what kind of family we were, she could deliver a polished answer in the tone of a press release. If you asked her how her son was doing, she'd pause like she needed to remember my name first, then tell you I was fine the way you'd say a lamp was working. My sister Blair was the centerpiece of that brand. She didn't just walk into rooms, she arrived. People adjusted their bodies around her without being asked. She had that talent for taking oxygen and calling it charisma, and my mother applauded it, fed it, polished it. Blair's laugh was always the loudest. Blair's opinion was always the funniest. Blair's needs were always the most urgent. My dad, Robert, was different. He wasn't the warm, talkative kind of dad you see in commercials, but he saw things. He noticed. He'd stand behind me in the kitchen when I was younger, not saying much, just placing a hand on my shoulder like an anchor point, like he was letting me know I wasn't crazy for feeling invisible. When I brought home good grades, he didn't clap or throw a party, but he'd nod slow and solid, and that nod meant more than my mother's distracted. That's nice. In a house where affection was rationed, my dad's quiet presence was the closest thing to safety I had. Then he died, and the only steady thing in that house vanished, like someone turned off a light and pretended they didn't hear the click. I flew back to Greenwich for the funeral because you do that even when you've spent years trying to become a person who doesn't need anyone. The service was expensive in all the ways that weren't comforting. The flowers were massive. The pews were packed with people who knew my father's name but not his voice. My mother was unusually sharp about details: seating arrangements, the order of speakers, which photo of Dad should be printed on the program. She treated grief like a schedule that needed to be managed. Blair was calm, not numb calm, not devastated calm. More like she'd already read the ending of the book and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. She hugged people, accepted condolences, dabbed her eyes at the appropriate moments, and never once looked like she might actually fall apart. In the days after the house filled with movement, caterers, family friends, people walking through Dad's study like it was a museum exhibit, I drifted through all of it, listening more than talking, and that's when I started noticing the small mismatches. Blair kept stepping away to take calls. Not quick, I'll call you back calls. Long, deliberate ones. I'd catch fragments as I passed the hallway. The file should already be there. No, not yet, the timing matters. We'll do it when it makes sense. The words were vague, but the tone wasn't. She sounded like someone coordinating something. Every time I appeared, she'd shift instantly, voice softening, switching topics with that practiced ease she had. I asked once casually who she was talking to. She smiled like I'd asked what the weather was and said, "Just taking care of things." It didn't feel like care. It felt like control. I told myself I was paranoid. Grief does that, right? It makes your brain look for patterns, for threats, for meaning. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being set up around me. Like the furniture in a room had been rearranged while I wasn't looking and everyone expected me to pretend I didn't notice. I went back to Portland after the funeral because staying in Greenwich felt like sleeping in a room where the air didn't circulate. Portland made sense. The routines made sense. The rain made sense. I tried to return to being the man who didn't think about his family unless absolutely necessary. I almost made it. Until my mother called a few months later with a voice that was too bright, too smooth, like she'd done a few warm-up takes before dialing. "Cole," she said, and she stretched my name out like a ribbon. "We're going to have a small birthday dinner for you at the house." Small. At the house. For me. The words didn't match the reality I'd lived. My birthday had never been a production. Blair's birthdays were productions. Mine were footnotes. So when my mother suddenly wanted a small dinner at the mansion, my stomach tightened before my mind caught up. "Mom, you don't have to," I started. "Nonsense," she cut in light and rehearsed. "It's important. We should be together." Together. Another word that didn't belong to us. I stared at my kitchen wall in Portland, the one I kept blank on purpose. I could have said no. I could have made up a work excuse. I was good at disappearing. But two thoughts pinned me in place. The first, I needed to know what was happening with Dad's will, not because I was greedy, because uncertainty is a weapon in families like mine, and I was tired of being unarmed. The second, I was tired of running. I'd spent my whole life trying to be low maintenance enough to earn peace, and I'd never gotten it anyway. Maybe it was time to look the cold in the face and stop pretending it wasn't there. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll come." When I hung up, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I'd agreed to show up at a scene that had been staged without my consent. I told myself it was just a dinner. I told myself I was being dramatic. But as the date got closer, that uneasy certainty grew. This wasn't about celebrating me. It was about them needing me in a chair under a light at the exact right moment. The day before my flight, an automated email hit my inbox from a shipping carrier. Not unusual. I order plenty of boring things: printer ink, protein powder, office supplies. But this one wasn't addressed to me. It was a delivery notification for the Caldwell house in Greenwich. The recipient was Blair Caldwell. The description was vague: Kit or Tess, the kind of generic label that could mean anything. But it was marked as out for delivery with a timestamp that lined up too neatly with my arrival. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. My mind offered a dozen innocent explanations. Blair could have ordered a health test, a COVID test, a vitamin panel, anything. But the hair on the back of my neck lifted anyway. Because of the timing. Because of the way she'd been talking about files and timing. Because my mother's invitation had sounded like a script and this felt like a prop being delivered to set. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment at the life I'd built that didn't require anyone's approval. Then I pictured the dining room in Greenwich, the long table, the polished silver. The way my mother's eyes always scanned for imperfections, like she was searching for a reason to be disappointed. I told myself one more time that I was overthinking it. But right before I went to sleep, I admitted the truth I'd been circling all day. Whatever was waiting for me in that house, it wasn't going to be cake and candles. It was going to be something they wanted me to see, something they wanted me to react to. And for the first time in my life, I didn't plan how to please them. I planned how to observe them. The Caldwell dining room always looked like it had been set for a magazine shoot 5 minutes before you arrived. Warm golden light. A table so long it made conversations feel like negotiations. plates placed with surgical precision, silverware lined up like soldiers. Even the air smelled curated lemon polish, expensive candles, something faintly floral that never belonged to real life. It should have felt welcoming. It never did. Perfection in that house wasn't comfort. It was a warning, don't mess this up. My mother was already seated when I walked in, a glass of wine in her hand. The first thing I noticed wasn't the drink itself. It was what she did with it. She kept rotating the stem between her fingers over and over, like the glass was the only stable thing in her world. She took tiny sips that barely changed the level, but she made sure it was never empty. Her smile appeared on cue, tight around the edges. "Happy birthday," she said, and it landed like a formality. Blair arrived a minute later like she was stepping onto a stage. Perfect hair, perfect outfit, that kind of tan that tells you she has time and money for maintenance. She leaned in to air kiss my cheek, not quite touching, then slid into her seat with a confidence that didn't ask permission. "Cole," she said like my name was a joke she'd already heard. "Look at you. Portland still treating you. Simple." She didn't wait for an answer. Blair never waited. She launched into a stream of updates about herself, new plans for a remodel, a trip she'd just taken, people she'd met, the kind of name-dropping that was supposed to sound casual. My mother laughed at all the right places, even when nothing was funny. I sat there and let the words wash over me because that's what I'd always done. Be pleasant. Be small. Don't create friction. But the air in the room felt off. Not just tense, expectant. Like everyone was counting beats in their head, waiting for the moment the music would drop. At some point between Blair's story about a private resort and my mother's third attempt to refill her wine without actually drinking it, I tried to touch the one subject that mattered. I kept my voice mild, almost polite to the point of self-erasure. I wanted to ask, I said, about Dad's will, just timing. I need to know when there's going to be a reading so I can arrange time off. It was the kind of sentence that should have been normal. Adult. Responsible. In our family, it was a flare shot into the night. My mother froze. Not dramatically. Just enough that you could see her smile stop functioning for half a second. Her eyes flicked to Blair, quick, almost unconscious, like she was waiting for a cue, like she needed permission to answer. Blair's mouth curved into a smile that wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile you wear when you know something the other person doesn't. "Oh," she said, sweet as frosting. "You're worried about that. I'm not worried," I replied, careful. "I just want to be informed." "You will be," Blair said. "Everything will be handled at the right time." The way she said right time made my skin prickle. It wasn't reassurance. It was a reminder that the timeline belonged to her. My mother cleared her throat and nodded too quickly. "Yes," she added, voice too light. "We're just not ready yet." I looked between them and felt something shift. The will wasn't family business. It was leverage. And I was the piece on the board they were discussing without ever naming directly. Dinner continued, but I stopped tasting it. The food was expensive, perfectly cooked, and completely irrelevant. Blair kept glancing at me between stories, her expression sharp with anticipation, like she was waiting for me to say the wrong thing so she could spring something. My mother's fingers never stopped circling that wine glass stem. She didn't look at me much. When she did, her eyes didn't hold. They bounced away like contact burned. When my mother stood to bring out dessert, I expected a cake, maybe something thoughtful, something that would justify this whole performance. What came was a small store-bought cake that hadn't even been transferred to a nicer plate. It was like the celebration part had been added last minute, a prop to make the scene believable. Before my mother could even set it down properly, Blair pushed her chair back with theatrical timing. "Actually," she said, reaching for a box wrapped in glossy silver paper, "I got you something." My mother's face drained so fast it looked like someone had pulled the plug on her expression. "Blair," she said, and her voice cracked on the name like a warning she didn't have the courage to finish. Blair ignored her. She slid the box across the table toward me, not gently, firmly, like she was delivering evidence. "Go on," she said, leaning in, her smile thin and bright. "Open it." The room went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Even the refrigerator hum sounded loud. My hands moved because there was nowhere else for them to go. I peeled back the paper, lifted the lid, and saw a DNA testing kit nestled inside. For a second, my brain didn't register it. Not because I didn't understand what it was, but because I couldn't believe she'd do it out loud. In front of our mother. In the house where we pretended we had manners. Blair laughed, a soft little sound that cut straight through me. Maybe this, she said loud enough to stop every fork midair, will explain why you're another man's mistake in this family. The words landed like a slap, not just because they were cruel, but because they were specific. People don't use that phrase unless they've been holding it in their mouth for a long time. I looked at my mother instinctively, expecting, hoping for something. A denial, anger, even a performative defense. Anything that said I mattered enough to protect. What I got was fear. Marianne didn't scold Blair. She didn't tell her to apologize. She didn't even say my name. She flinched like the sentence had exposed a wire she'd spent decades hiding. Her lips parted, and all that came out was a thin, strangled whisper. Blair. Just that. A plea, not a rebuke. Then silence. The kind of silence that confirms more than words ever could. In that moment, humiliation wasn't even the sharpest feeling in my chest. The sharpest feeling was clarity. They didn't suspect. They knew. This wasn't a drunk insult or a random cruelty. This was a rehearsed line in a plan. And my mother's reaction told me the truth she'd never say. Blair had just spoken something that was only supposed to stay behind closed doors. I did what I'd always done. I kept my face steady. I didn't give Blair the reaction she wanted. I set the lid back on the box slowly, as if it were just another awkward gift. I forced a breath through my nose, tasted lemon polish in the air, and nodded once. Wow, I said quietly, like I was commenting on the weather. Happy birthday to me. Blair's eyes narrowed, almost disappointed. She wanted tears or rage. She wanted a scene. My calm denied her the climax. I stood, thanked my mother for dinner because my body knows the script even when my mind is screaming, and excused myself. My mother didn't stop me. She didn't follow. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just sat there with her wine glass like it was holding her upright. Upstairs, my old room looked wrong. It was too clean, too staged, as if someone had prepared it for my return, not with love, but with control. The bed was made with hospital corners. The shelves were dusted. The small things I remembered, random clutter, and old sweatshirt shoved in the corner, were gone. I set the DNA kit on the bed and stood in the middle of the room, listening to the house settle. Every instinct in me said, leave, drive to a hotel, get away from this place and this feeling. But another instinct, colder and steadier, kept me there. If they'd brought me back to this house for a reason, the house might be holding the rest of the reason. I opened the closet and ran my fingers along the top shelf. Dust. Except for one section, where the dust had been smeared like a box had been slid out and shoved back recently. It didn't match the logic of neglect. If no one touched anything, the dust would be even. This was a clean swipe, recent human. I stared at that streak like it was a fingerprint. Downstairs, I could hear faint laughter, Blair's voice carrying through the hallway, my mother's responding too high. They were already moving on, already treating what just happened like entertainment. Like I was entertainment. I exhaled slowly, not to calm down, but to focus. I wasn't leaving tonight. Not yet. Not until I knew what they'd been touching in my room. Not until I found whatever it was they were trying to keep ahead of. Because now I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. This dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a setup. And if they'd gone to the trouble of setting it, there was more coming. I turned back to the closet, pulled a chair over, and reached for the first box on the top shelf with the careful patience of someone who knows evidence can disappear by morning. I pulled the chair closer to the closet shelf and started lifting boxes down one by one, slow enough not to make noise, fast enough that I didn't talk myself out of it. The house had settled into its nighttime quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, just expensive. Somewhere downstairs, I could still hear a faint echo of Blair's laugh, then it faded like the house swallowed it. I turned on the lamp by my bed instead of the overhead light. I didn't want to announce what I was doing. I didn't even know who I was hiding from. Old instincts don't ask permission. The first box was exactly what I expected: school notebooks with my name written too neatly on the front, folders of papers graded with red ink, the kind of good kid evidence I used to stack up like it might earn me a place. I flipped through a spelling test from 3rd grade and felt something sharp in my throat that had nothing to do with nostalgia. It wasn't that my childhood hurt more now. It was that I could see it clearly. I'd done everything right. I'd been quiet, helpful, easy. And it still hadn't made me wanted. Those straight A's, those perfect little gold stars, they weren't proof I was loved. They were proof I'd been trying. The next box had photos, holiday gatherings, stiff smiles, the Caldwell mansion dressed up for seasons like it was the one getting celebrated. In almost every picture, Blair was centered. My mother's hand was on her shoulder. My father stood slightly behind as if he didn't want to block the view. And me, I was always off to the side, half in the frame, like I'd wandered in at the last second and nobody bothered to move. I kept digging and the digging stopped feeling like reminiscing. It started feeling like inventory. Like I was auditing my own past for irregularities. That's what grief does when it mixes with suspicion. It turns you into someone who can't leave well enough alone. At the bottom of a box that didn't belong on this shelf, one of those generic moving boxes with no label, I found an envelope. It wasn't tucked in like it had been forgotten. It was placed flat, almost careful, like someone wanted it to be found, but not too easily. The paper looked newer than everything around it. The corners weren't softened by time. The flap wasn't yellowed. It didn't match the dust and wear of the rest of the box. My pulse started doing that slow, heavy thing it does when your body knows something before your brain lets it in. I slid the envelope out and held it up to the lamp. No name on it. No return address. Just plain paper and a sealed flap. For a second I stared at it like it might bite. Then I opened it. Inside was a photograph. My mother was younger in it, softer around the eyes, holding a baby on her hip. Me. I knew it was me even before I recognized the tiny details: my hair, the shape of my cheeks. But the part that made my stomach drop was the man standing beside her. He had one arm around my mother's shoulders like he belonged there. He wasn't my father. He wasn't Robert Caldwell. I studied his face like I could pull answers out of it. Dark hair, clean jawline, a smile that looked practiced but not cruel. He wore a suit that fit too well to be random. The background looked like some kind of formal event, maybe a fundraiser, the kind the Caldwells always attended and never enjoyed. I flipped the photo over with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. 2 words were written on the back in my mother's handwriting: "Forgive me." That was it. No date. Was it. No. No explanation. No name. Just a confession with no context, like she'd written it to herself and forgot someone else might read it. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo until my eyes started to blur. Not from tears, not yet. From the effort of keeping myself steady. My mind raced through every possibility: adoption affair, some family arrangement no one ever spoke about. But the simplest conclusion kept pushing through the noise, and it felt like swallowing glass. I wasn't Robert Caldwell's biological son. And my mother had known. I didn't let myself spiral. Not yet. I did what I do when I'm scared. I documented. I took out my phone and snapped pictures like a man building a case: front of the photo, back of the photo, the envelope itself, the inside of the box's position on the shelf, the angle of the dust around it. The last part surprised even me, but when I leaned closer I saw it. The dust along the bottom of that box wasn't even. There were clean streaks, as if something had been lifted out and returned recently. The envelope hadn't been sitting there untouched for years. Someone had handled it. That was the part that made my skin go cold. If nobody had touched my old things, the dust would be uniform. The house staff might clean surfaces, sure, but they weren't pulling boxes off closet shelves. This wasn't housekeeping. This was someone searching, someone checking, someone making sure certain things were where they wanted them to be. Either my mother had been in here, or Blair had. And if they'd been in my room recently, then tonight's DNA gift wasn't just cruelty. It was choreography. A scene that had been planned, positioned, and rehearsed down to the props. I put the photo back into the envelope and held it for a moment like it was heavier than paper. Then I set it down on the bed beside the DNA kit. Seeing them next to each other made my chest tighten. The kit wasn't a gag gift. It was a weapon wrapped in silver paper. I picked up the kit and read the instructions more carefully than anyone does when they're just curious about their ancestry. There was a registration code. There were prompts about creating an account, entering your email, your phone number, your mailing address. The language was friendly, casual, designed to make you feel safe. But all I could think about was Blair's face when she slid it across the table, and my mother's fear when she couldn't even defend me. If Blair bought this kit, what else could she see? Order tracking status updates? Could she call the company and pretend to be me? Could she fish for information the same way she fished for control in every room she entered? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to hand her the chance. I opened a notes app and started listing steps like I was planning an operation. New email address. No personal phone number attached. Results delivered to a separate mailbox back in Portland. Keep every receipt. Photograph every code. Document dates, times, anything that could be questioned later. Because I could already hear the future argument coming. You faked it. You misread it. You're being dramatic. You're embarrassing the family. I was done being the person who lost by default because I didn't come prepared. Still, none of that answered the one thing I couldn't keep circling forever. I sat there on the bed staring at the kit and felt the weight of a truth I'd avoided my whole life. I had always suspected I didn't belong. I just never had proof. Blair had handed me proof like a joke, and my mother had confirmed it with silence. I didn't sleep much. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house breathe, pipes, ticking wood, settling the distant hum of an HVAC system that never stopped. In my head, questions kept lining up like dominoes. If I wasn't a Caldwell by blood, who was I? Who was the man in the photo? And why did Robert Caldwell, my father in every way that mattered, keep me in that house? If the truth was sitting right there waiting to burn everything down, right before dawn, I made a decision that felt less like courage and more like necessity. I was going to send the test in, not to satisfy Blair, not to appease my mother. I was going to send it because I was tired of living inside a question mark. Before I closed my eyes, I put the envelope back exactly where I found it, down to the angle, down to the way the dust sat around it. I didn't want anyone to know I'd seen it. Not yet. Then I placed the DNA kit in my carry-on like it was fragile, like it might break open and spill my life across the floor. When the sun finally came up, I left the Caldwell house with the same calm face I'd worn at the dinner table. I said goodbye like nothing happened. I hugged my mother because that's what sons do even when their mothers can't look them in the eye. Blair watched me from the doorway with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In the car to the airport, I stared out at the manicured lawns and stone fences and told myself one thing over and over like a promise. I will get the truth on my terms. And when it comes, I won't be the one caught unprepared. Portland greeted me the way it always did. Gray sky, wet sidewalks, the soft hiss of tires on pavement. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt contaminated. Like the calm I'd built was suddenly porous, and every quiet moment had room for my sister's laughter to echo back in. I went to work, sat at my desk, opened spreadsheets, answered emails, nodded in meetings, and did everything I could to behave like the same man who'd left. But the whole time my mind kept replaying that dining room scene with cruel clarity, the silver box sliding across the table, Blair's voice throwing that sentence like a dart, my mother's face draining as if she'd seen a ghost. I started keeping a running log on my phone. Not dramatic journal entries. Facts. Date I got my mother's call inviting me to the small birthday dinner. Date I received the shipping notification to Greenwich recipient Blair description kit test. Date of the dinner. Exact wording Blair used. Exact reaction from Marianne, how she didn't defend me. How she whispered Blair's name like a warning meant to stop the truth from being spoken out loud. I wrote down the make and model of the DNA kit, the registration code, the lot number printed in tiny text on the inside flap. I wrote down everything because something in me understood this wasn't going to stay personal. Families like mine don't fight with feelings. They fight with narratives. And I wasn't going to lose just because I didn't keep receipts. The next morning, I drove to a shipping center and mailed the kit. Not from my neighborhood, not from my usual post office. I paid in a way that didn't tie back to my main accounts. Then I went straight to a small mailbox rental place and opened a P.O. box. The woman behind the counter didn't care who I was. She just wanted my paperwork signed and my payment processed. It was the most honest interaction I'd had in days. For the email registration, I created a fresh address with no personal identifiers, no Cole, no Caldwell, no birthdays, nothing Blair could guess in 5 tries. I didn't attach my phone number. I didn't sync it to my devices. I treated that email like a locked drawer that only existed for one purpose. When I finally registered the kit, I used the P.O. box address for everything. It felt paranoid. It also felt like the first time I'd taken control of my own story. Waiting for the results was its own kind of torture because it turned every day into a countdown. I'd be at my desk half listening to a colleague explain a forecast, and my mind would drift to the man in the photograph. I'd be standing in line for coffee and catch myself studying strangers' faces, wondering if any of them looked like me. I tried not to spiral into theories, but the truth is I'd lived inside a suspicion for so long that I didn't know how to be patient anymore. When the notification finally appeared, it wasn't dramatic. It came on a Tuesday afternoon while my office was quiet, the kind of day where the loudest sound is the printer warming up. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. Results ready. My hands didn't shake at first. They went cold. I clicked the email, logged in, and stared at the screen as if it might be a trick. No biological relationship detected with Caldwell lineage. The words sat there blunt and clean. No anger, no apology. Just a fact that rearranged my entire life in one line. I kept reading. Suggested match Hartwell. The name hit me like a door slamming somewhere far away. I'd never heard it in my mother's mouth. Never heard it in my father's. Never heard it in the Caldwell house at all. It wasn't a family friend, it wasn't a neighbor, it wasn't a business partner I could recall. It was a name that belonged to a world my family had clearly kept sealed off from me. I stared at it until the letters stopped looking like letters. Then, almost without thinking, I opened the photos from my father's funeral on my phone. I hadn't looked at them much. It felt wrong, like gawking at grief. But now I scrolled with a different purpose. I zoomed in on the crowd, on faces, on the people my mother never introduced. There had been a small cluster of them, well-dressed, quiet, the kind of presence that feels like it carries authority without needing to announce it. They weren't Caldwell friends. They didn't mingle. They stayed together, spoke in low voices, and left without making a scene. At the time, I assumed they were business associates. Now, with the name Hartwell staring at me, the memory shifted. My mother had watched that group like a hawk, not with hospitality, with tension. My stomach tightened as the dots started lining up. I didn't go straight to confrontation. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Blair. I did what I'd promised myself I'd do. I kept it clean. I took screenshots of the result. I captured the page showing the timestamp. I captured the suggested match. I saved it in multiple places. Then I opened my family group chat. I typed one sentence. No accusations, no insults, no emotional paragraphs. Does anyone want to explain this? I attached the screenshot and hit send. The typing bubble didn't appear right away. For a few seconds, the chat sat silent, and I could almost picture my message landing like a grenade on that polished Greenwich countertop. Then my phone rang. My mother. I answered, and the sound that came through wasn't a greeting. It was panic wrapped in tears, like she'd been holding her breath for decades and finally ran out of air. Cole, she said, and my name sounded cracked in her mouth. Please, please delete that. That was her first instinct. Not, are you okay? Not, what did you find out? Not, I'm sorry. Delete that. Delete what I asked, keeping my voice flat even though my chest felt tight. The message, the picture, all of it. She begged. You don't understand. This is complicated. It's old. It's please, sweetheart, you can't. Can't what I pressed. Can't tell the truth. Can't embarrass you. Can't say out loud what you've clearly known for years. She cried harder, and I heard fear in it, not grief. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequences. Fear of a story she couldn't control anymore. Just delete it, she repeated. Don't do this in front of people. In front of who, I asked. Blair. The woman who handed me the test and called me another man's mistake. My mother didn't answer that. She just kept pleading like if she could make the words urgent enough, I'd fold the way I always had. I hung up without shouting, not as punishment, as a boundary. Because if I stayed on the line, I'd either explode or cave, and I didn't want either. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a message from Blair. Well, now you know. That was it. No denial, no defense, no attempt to soften it. Just confirmation delivered like she'd been waiting for this moment and didn't care what it did to me. I stared at the screen until my eyes hurt. Then I took a screenshot of that message too and added it to my folder. I didn't call her right away. I walked out of my office building instead into the damp Portland air and let the cold wake me up. I paced the sidewalk, listening to the city sounds, cars, distant voices, the steady rhythm of a place where nobody knew my family name. I should have felt free. I felt hunted. That night I went home and started pulling out my own old documents the way I'd done in Greenwich folders I'd kept from college, a few family papers I'd inherited by accident, invitation lists, memorial programs from the funeral. I searched for the name Hartwell the way you search for a hidden needle in a familiar haystack. I found nothing obvious. But I did notice patterns. Names on the funeral program that weren't explained. A florist receipt addressed to my mother from someone with a last name I didn't recognize. A handwritten note in my mother's purse at the time of the funeral that I'd photographed without thinking because it had seemed oddly formal. All small things. But small things are how big secrets survive. 2 days later, I got an alert on the burner email account I'd created for the DNA results. A security notification. Unusual sign-in attempt. Different device. Different location. The timestamp was almost identical to the moment the results had gone live. My mouth went dry. I hadn't shared that email with anyone. I hadn't used it for anything else. I'd been careful. And still, someone had tried to get in. I changed the password immediately, something long and ugly no human could guess. I enabled two-factor authentication. I reviewed every setting, every connected device, every login history I could access. I logged out of everything. Then I sat on my couch in the quiet of my apartment and let the reality settle in. This wasn't just family drama anymore. Someone was reaching for my information. Someone was trying to stay one step ahead of what I knew. And if Blair was calm in her message, if my mother was terrified on the phone, and if someone had tried to access the one place my results lived, then the DNA kit wasn't just a nasty joke at dinner. It was a tool, a lever, a way to track and pressure and control the story the moment it started slipping. I opened my notes app and added one final line beneath all the dates and screenshots. From this point forward, nothing goes through emotion. Everything goes through counsel. I didn't have a lawyer yet, but I knew I was going to need one, because the version of me that tried to keep the peace was the version they knew how to use, and the version of me that was waking up now, the one taking screenshots, locking accounts, renting P.O. boxes, wasn't going to be handled with guilt and wine and rehearsed smiles. I looked out at the Portland rain streaking down my window and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, not relief. Resolve. After that security alert hit my burner email and I locked everything down, I didn't sleep. I lay on my couch with my laptop open and the rain tapping the window like a metronome, staring at the screenshot of Blair's message. Well, now you know, until the words stopped looking like language and started looking like a threat. I kept thinking about my mother's voice on the phone, how she didn't ask if I was okay, how she went straight to damage control. Delete it. Don't do this in front of people. Like my existence was a mess she needed to mop up before the neighbors smelled it. By morning, the shock had burned off and left something colder behind. I didn't want explanations that sounded like excuses. I wanted motive. Because cruelty for fun is one thing. Cruelty with a plan behind it is another. And if Blair was calm, and my mother was scared, and someone tried to get into the one place my results lived, then what was really being protected wasn't my feelings. It was something else. I called Blair. She picked up on the third ring like she'd been expecting it. Her voice was bright in that way that always made me feel like I was the punchline even when she wasn't laughing. So she said, "You finally did it." "I'm not calling to talk about whether I did it," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I'm calling to ask why you went that far. The dinner, the kit, the way you said it. You wanted the whole room to hear." A pause. "Not surprise. Calculation. I wanted you to stop pretending," she said. "You've been playing the quiet victim for years." "I'm not asking for your commentary," I said. "I'm asking what you're trying to accomplish." She laughed softly, like I was adorable for thinking I could corner her with a direct question. Then her voice dropped half an inch and the air changed. "Mom owes me," she said. I didn't respond right away. I let the words sit there because they didn't make sense until they did. In the Caldwell house, debt didn't always mean money. Sometimes it meant secrets. Sometimes it meant loyalty. Sometimes it meant a lifetime of playing along so the public story stayed clean. "Owes you for what I asked. For keeping my mouth shut," Blair said, matter of fact. "For carrying the thing she didn't want anyone to know. For doing what she was too scared to do." "You're talking about me," I said. Not a question. "I'm talking about the truth," she snapped, irritation flashing through the polish. "And the truth has value. Don't act like you don't understand that. You work in finance. You know what leverage is." My stomach tightened. Not because she said it, but because she said it so plainly, like she'd been waiting years for a chance to use that word out loud. "So this is leverage," I said. "Against Mom. Against Dad's estate. Against me." "Don't flatter yourself," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice again. "This is about what's fair." "Fair," I repeated, and the word tasted bitter. "You already had everything. You think you know what I had," Blair shot back. "You think being the one who stayed here was some kind of prize I stayed. I dealt with Mom. I dealt with Dad. I played the role. And then he died, and suddenly you get to swoop in from your little rainy apartment and act like you deserve a seat at the table." "I wasn't asking for a seat," I said. "I asked when the will reading was." "And that's exactly it," she replied. "You're always acting like you're just asking while you position yourself. It's pathetic." I closed my eyes and forced my breathing to stay slow. This wasn't a sibling argument. This was a negotiation, and Blair was showing me her price. "Say it clearly," I told her. "What do you want?" Another pause. Then, with the calm confidence of someone revealing the obvious, "I want what I'm owed," she said. "And if Mom wants to keep her precious reputation intact, she'll make sure I get it. Because if she doesn't, well, people love stories like this." There it was. The threat dressed up as inevitability. And underneath it something worse: she believed she could reshape the family story into whatever benefited her. I didn't yell, I didn't insult her. I did what I've learned to do when someone shows their hand. I listened. I memorized the wording. I watched the pattern. "You bought the kid," I said, like I was confirming a transaction. "Of course I did," she answered. "You think you'd do it on your own, you wouldn't. You'd just keep being invisible. And you wanted me to send it in?" I said. "You wanted proof on record. Proof is proof," Blair said. "It's not my fault you can't handle it." I ended the call before she could keep spinning. My hands were steady when I set my phone down, but my chest felt bruised. It wasn't heartbreak. It was something more complicated, the realization that my sister didn't just dislike me. She saw me as a variable in her math. I opened my notes app and typed a summary of the call while it was still fresh. Exact phrases, tone shifts. The way she framed it as debt, leverage, reputation, stories. I saved it with the date and time. Then I searched for an attorney. I didn't want someone who would fight dirty. I wanted someone who wouldn't get emotionally hypnotized by money, family names, or the idea that this was just a messy private matter. I found Dana Liu through a recommendation from a colleague who'd gone through a complicated inheritance dispute. Dana's profile was blunt trust and estate litigation, fiduciary disputes, contested wills. Her reviews didn't talk about charm. They talked about precision. When we met, it was over a video call first. Dana's office behind her was clean, not stylish. She looked at me the way a doctor looks at symptoms, no judgment, just focus. Start from the beginning, she said. Not feelings. Sequence. So I gave her sequence. The funeral. My mother's careful obsession with appearances. Blair's calmness and those phone calls about files, appointments, timing. The sudden birthday dinner invitation that sounded rehearsed. The shipping notification kit test delivered to the Greenwich address with Blair as recipient. The dinner table scene, Blair's line loud and deliberate. My mother's fear and silence. The night in my room. The envelope. The photograph. The words on the back. Forgive me. The dust patterns that suggested someone had handled it recently. The DNA registration process. The decision to use a separate email and a P.O. box. The results no relationship to the Caldwell lineage suggested match Hartwell. My message in the family chat. My mother's panic call asking me to delete it. Blair's cold text. The attempted login to my burner email the moment the results went live. Then the call with Blair where she admitted my mother owed her and that she was willing to weaponize the story if she didn't get what she wanted. Dana didn't interrupt much. She took notes and asked clarifying questions only when it mattered, like a prosecutor building a timeline. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and tapped her pen once against her notebook. This isn't just family cruelty, she said. This is strategy. I didn't like how validating that felt. What does that mean legally? I asked. It means, Dana said carefully, your sister may be trying to change the way you're treated under the estate plan by turning your parentage into a legal argument. If your father used any trusts or clauses that define beneficiaries by bloodline, she may be aiming to disqualify you. Even if he didn't, she may be planning to pressure your mother or the estate's representatives with the threat of public exposure. I nodded because that matched what my stomach had already concluded. Dana continued. The other concern is the timing. If your father anticipated conflict, he might have built protections into the will or trust structure. Some people include provisions that activate only when a dispute arises, additional instructions, evidence packets, penalties. It's not common in regular families. It's common in wealthy families with messy dynamics. The word penalties made something in my memory shift. My father's steady quiet. The way he watched people more than he talked. The way he never seemed startled by Blair's performative affection. The way he looked like he was always thinking 2 moves ahead. What do we do? I asked. We keep everything Dana said. We stop having conversations you can't document. And we gather third-party information. People who saw things. People who can confirm patterns. So I did. I called a neighbor from my childhood, someone who used to wave at me when I biked down the street and treated me like a human being even when my own house didn't. I called the longtime housekeeper who'd worked for us on and off and had retired but still answered my number. I called a man who'd been a friend of my father's, more business than personal, but close enough to know the rhythms of Dad's last years. I didn't ask the big question. I didn't say, am I his son? That would make people defensive. It would make them choose loyalty. Instead, I asked small questions that built a pattern. When Dad was sick, who visited most? Who was always around? Who brought papers to sign? Who talked about lawyers? Who seemed overly interested in organizing things? The answers didn't come as smoking guns. They came as overlaps. The neighbor remembered Blair's car in the driveway constantly, even on days when my father was too weak to see anyone. The housekeeper remembered Blair insisting on being present during important conversations, hovering whenever a folder appeared. My father's friend hesitated, then admitted something that made my jaw clench. He'd heard Blair mention casually that she'd talked to a couple people about getting ahead of the estate stuff. He'd assumed she meant making things easier. In hindsight, the way she said it had sounded triumphant. Dana asked me to summarize each call and send it to her. I did, with dates and names and context, keeping the tone neutral. I was building a file, not a diary. Then one of the conversations handed me a detail that didn't feel like gossip. It felt like a crack in a dam. A financial contact of my father's, someone who'd been around during the later years, mentioned that my father had complained once about a transfer he didn't authorize. Not loudly. Not as an accusation. More like confusion mixed with disappointment. He'd said something along the lines of "I didn't do that," and then he'd waved it off because he was tired and didn't have the energy for confrontation. He'd been sick. He'd been managing medications and appointments and the slow shrinking of his own body. He hadn't had the strength to chase a missing transaction. I didn't have statements. I didn't have numbers. But hearing that my father had noticed something and hadn't been able to stop it made my throat go tight. Dana's response was immediate. "That matters. We may need to request accountings later. Not now. Later, when the proper process opens. But you're right to record this." A week passed in a blur of work and phone calls and careful documentation. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I started saving every voicemail. I stopped texting emotionally. Everything became per my earlier message and "please confirm" in writing. It felt clinical. It also felt like armor. Then one morning I got an email. It was short, polite, generic enough to look harmless. It came from a law office with a Manhattan address and a signature line that made my stomach drop. Harlan Price. The message said something like, "We are updating our records. Please confirm your current mailing address and preferred contact information." No mention of my father's name. No mention of the estate. Just a gentle administrative request. I forwarded it to Dana immediately. She called me within minutes. "Don't respond directly," she said. "Not yet. It's just an address confirmation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's never just an address confirmation," Dana replied. "Not with that context. The timing is significant. This came after you shared the DNA results and after your sister escalated. Your father's counsel reaching out now suggests a process is about to start. And if your sister is trying to box you out, this might be your father's structure pushing back." I stared at the email on my screen, the Manhattan address at the bottom, the neat professional language. It felt like the first external sign that my father had been expecting this. That he'd left something behind beyond money, beyond silence. Dana said, "From now on, everything from that office goes through me. We log it. We keep it. If they ask for confirmation, we reply in a controlled way. If there's a meeting, you do not go alone." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it through the phone. My throat felt dry. When I hung up, I looked at the rain sliding down my window and realized something that made my stomach tighten all over again. My father's lawyer didn't email me because of my feelings. He emailed because of procedure, and procedure means a door was about to open. I saved the email, printed a copy, and placed it in a folder I labeled with nothing but the date. Then I sat at my kitchen table and waited for the next move, trying to ignore the heavy sense that the quiet part of this story was ending. The first pressure came in small, ugly ways. A blocked number calling at odd hours. A voicemail with no words, just breathing, and then a click. A text from an unknown number that read, "Don't make this worse. Don't go to New York." Not signed, not explained, just planted in my phone like a seed of anxiety. I tried to tell myself it could be random. Spam. A wrong number. But my nervous system didn't buy it. The timing matched too cleanly with Harlan Price's email, with my conversation with Dana, with my sister realizing I wasn't going to fold. Then the formal shot arrived. An email from Victor Sloan. The subject line was something bland and legal-sounding: notice of defamatory statements and demand to cease and desist. I opened it with Dana on speakerphone. The email accused me of spreading false information that could damage the Caldwell family's reputation. It referenced my public sharing of sensitive claims. It demanded I retract statements and stop communicating unverified allegations to third parties. The language was aggressive without being specific, designed to intimidate. It didn't address the fact that I hadn't posted anything publicly. It didn't address the DNA results. It didn't address Blair's own words. It was a fog machine meant to fill the room so nobody could see the exits. Dana's voice stayed calm. "Do not reply," she said. "We respond on our terms. In writing. With facts. This is meant to scare you into silence. It's working," I admitted, then hated myself for it. "It's designed to work," Dana replied. "Fear is cheaper than evidence." The next day, the pressure moved closer to my life. My HR department asked to speak with me. I sat in a small conference room with a glass wall and a bowl of stale candy on the table, listening to a woman with a careful smile say, "We received a call asking to verify some information about you. Something about a personal legal matter. We didn't provide any details, of course, but we wanted to check in." My face stayed neutral because I've trained it that way, but inside something went cold. It wasn't just that someone contacted my workplace. It was that they did it with enough confidence to pretend they were entitled to a response. Like my life was another file they could request. "I'm handling a private family matter," I said, choosing each word carefully. "There's no issue that affects my work performance." HR nodded, relieved to hear something clean. "Okay," she said. "Just keep us informed if anything changes." I walked back to my desk, feeling like the ground under me wasn't as stable as it had been. Portland had been my refuge. Now it had fingerprints from Greenwich on the door. Dana didn't let me drift. She gave me instructions like a lifeline. Save the cease and desist. Save every voicemail. Screenshot every text. Write down your HR meeting date, time, who was present, exactly what was said. Do not speak to Blair on the phone again unless we're recording legally or using a written channel. Do not argue. Do not defend yourself to people who aren't asking in good faith. We're building a clear record. So I did. I bought a notebook I never used for anything else and started logging everything like a case file. I kept my tone factual. I kept my emotions out of it, not because I didn't feel them, but because emotions were the thing my family always used to make me look unstable. Then Dana called me one afternoon and said I just got a call from someone named Elliot Crane. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then my stomach tightened anyway. "He's a private investigator," Dana continued. "He says your father hired him months before he died. His words were specific." I stood up from my desk and walked into an empty stairwell so nobody could hear me breathe too hard. "What did he say?" I asked. Dana paused like she was choosing how to deliver it. "He said your father anticipated someone would try to use biology against you. He said your father documented actions related to the estate. He didn't give details on the phone. He said he has materials and instructions. And he said he was waiting for a certain condition to be met." My grip tightened on the railing. The stairwell smelled like concrete and cleaning solution, and suddenly I was back in my childhood bedroom in Greenwich, staring at dust patterns and an envelope that didn't belong. "Condition," I repeated. "Yes," Dana said. "And Cole, this part matters. He said your father told him to release information only if your parentage was used to shame you or to exclude you." For a moment I couldn't speak. My father had been dying, and while I thought he was just enduring it quietly, he was building something. Not revenge, protection. A structure sturdy enough to stand even after he was gone. Dana said Elliot wants to meet in person or at least deliver the materials through proper channels. I told him we'd coordinate. I swallowed. So Dad knew. "He knew enough to plan," Dana replied. "Which means we need to be very careful. If your sister is escalating, it's because she senses there's something she can't control." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Misspelled rushed like her hands were shaking as she typed. "Don't go. Please, don't go. I'm begging you. No context, no explanation. Just fear." Then Dana's phone rang again, and when she put me on hold to answer, I stared at my mother's message until the letters blurred. She'd never begged me for anything like that. She'd demanded, she'd instructed, she'd corrected. Begging meant she was terrified. Dana came back on the line. "Cole," she said, voice steady. "Harlan Price's office just called me." My heart thudded once heavy. "They want you in Manhattan," Dana said. "They're calling it an urgent meeting." Their wording was clear. "It's about you. About me. Not about the estate. Not about probate. Not about the will reading. About me." I sat down on the cold stairwell step because my legs suddenly felt like they didn't trust themselves. Dana kept talking. "They contacted your mother and sister first. Then they reached out to us. They want all parties present. They also confirmed you are permitted to attend with counsel." I could hear the click of a door in my memory like a mechanism finally engaging. My father's lawyer didn't reach out to ask where I lived. He reached out because the process had started. Whatever my father set in place, it was moving now. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another text. Don't embarrass the family. Stay home. I didn't respond. I just saved it. Dana said we're going. It wasn't a question. A part of me wanted to say no anyway. Not because I didn't want the truth, but because stepping into that room in Manhattan meant stepping into the center of the Caldwell machine. It meant being seen. It meant being attacked. It meant not being able to hide behind distance anymore. Dana's voice softened slightly. This is why you hired me. They're trying to scare you into withdrawing before you hear what your father left. The fact that they're contacting your job, sending cease and desist letters, pressuring you with anonymous messages, none of that is what people do when they're confident. It's what they do when they're trying to control timing. I took a breath and looked at the raindrops sliding down the stairwell window, thin streaks of gray daylight. What if they try something legal before we get there? I asked. Dana didn't hesitate. I'm checking filings now. A few minutes later, she called me back with a tone that was all business. Your sister's side submitted an emergency petition, she said. They're attempting to temporarily restrict access to estate information by labeling you as not a biological heir. It's a preemptive move to create doubt and slow things down. My hands went numb. Can they do that? They can try, Dana said. But it doesn't mean they'll succeed. It means they're trying to shape the first impression before the meeting. I closed my eyes. I could picture Blair doing it, creating a narrative first, making other people react to her version, forcing me to play defense. She'd been doing that to me my entire life. The only difference now was she'd added attorneys and court documents to her toolkit. Dana continued. Elliot Crane also texted me. He says he has a sealed envelope your father left with instructions. It's not to be opened casually. It's to be produced under specific circumstances. The fact that Harlan is calling a meeting about you suggests we're close to those circumstances. A sealed envelope. My mind flashed to the envelope I'd found in my closet in Greenwich. The photograph. Forgive me. My father had his own sealed things too, apparently. Things he kept for the right moment. I stood up and felt my spine straighten in a way it hadn't in days. Fear was still there, but it was being pushed aside by something stronger, the sense that running now would be exactly what they wanted. I looked at my phone at my mother's pleading message, at the anonymous threats, at Victor Sloane's legal fog. And I heard my father's silence in a new way. Not absence. Intention. I'm going. I said more to myself than to Dana. Good, Dana replied. We travel together. You don't take calls from them. You don't meet anyone alone. You bring every document, every screenshot, every log. We walk in prepared. After I hung up, I went back to my desk and opened my calendar. I blocked out days. I booked flights. I printed copies of everything and placed them in a folder like I was heading to court, because in a way I was. That night I packed with a strange calm. Not peace calm. The kind that comes when you stop trying to win love and start trying to survive truthfully. I tucked the printed DNA results into my carry-on. I added the photo of the envelope from Greenwich. I added the screenshots of Blair's messages. My mother's call log, the security alert from the burner email, the cease and desist from Victor Sloane, the HR meeting note, the anonymous texts. Before I zipped the bag closed, I hesitated with my hand on the zipper, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. My whole life I'd been trained to ask permission to exist in that family, to keep things smooth, to not make scenes, to not force conversations people didn't want to have. For the first time, I wasn't asking. I was showing up. The flight from Portland to New York felt longer than it should have, not because of turbulence or delays, but because there was nothing left to hope for. I wasn't flying east believing my family would suddenly understand me, apologize, or soften. That hope had burned out quietly somewhere over the Rockies. What remained was a single steady objective, the truth needed to stand in the open exactly where it belonged without being bent or negotiated away. I sat by the window, headphones on, without music, watching clouds slide past like blank pages, and repeated Dana's words to myself the way you repeat safety instructions before impact. Do not react emotionally. Do not argue morality. Stick to facts. Stick to process. Let the structure do the work. In my carry-on was a folder I'd gone through at least 10 times. DNA results printed and time-stamped. Photos of the envelope from Greenwich, the handwriting on the back of the photo, the dust patterns. Screenshots of Blair's messages, my mother's missed calls, the anonymous texts. The security alert from the burner email. The cease and desist from Victor Sloan. The note from HR summarizing the verification call. A timeline I'd typed out line by line until it read like a ledger, not a confession. I wasn't going to Manhattan as a son or a brother. I was going as a person whose life had been turned into a disputed record. Dana met me at the airport. She looked the same as always, composed, practical, carrying her own slim briefcase like an extension of her arm. On the ride into the city, she walked me through the meeting again, calmly, methodically. Where to sit, when to speak, when to stay silent, how to answer if someone tried to provoke me. She didn't promise victory, she promised structure, and that was enough. Harlan Price's office occupied the upper floors of a Manhattan building that felt intentionally intimidating. Dark wood, glass walls, a view of the river that reminded you how small you were in the grand scheme of things. The conference room itself looked less like a place for discussion and more like a private courtroom. Long table, heavy chairs, no personal touches. Just authority, polished and quiet. We arrived early. I wanted time to breathe and observe. I noted the doors, the seating arrangement where the documents would likely be placed. I chose a seat near the window beside Dana, angled so I wasn't directly across from where my sister would sit. I didn't want confrontation to become theater. Harlan Price entered without ceremony. He was exactly what you'd expect from a man trusted with generational wealth and long memories, calm, precise, carrying a thick folder that he placed on the table without opening it. The gesture alone told everyone why we were there. That folder was the center of gravity. My mother arrived next. Marianne looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like the tailoring of her life had finally failed her. Her hair was pinned back too tightly. Her hand gripped her purse as if it contained oxygen. She didn't look at me. She looked at the clock. Over and over. Blair arrived last, perfectly styled posture, straight expression, controlled. She brought Victor Sloan with her, who took in the room with the careful eyes of someone calculating risk rather than dominance. Blair's confidence was still there, but I saw the crack immediately. Her gaze flicked just once to the folder in front of Harlan and lingered a fraction of a second too long. Harlan cleared his throat and began. He acknowledged the presence of legal counsel on both sides and stated plainly that the meeting had been convened under written instructions left by Robert Caldwell. He emphasized that this was not a routine procedural gathering. It was a meeting triggered by specific conditions outlined in advance. He said those conditions included any attempt to use questions of parentage to humiliate, discredit, or exclude me from consideration in matters related to Robert Caldwell's estate. Something cold and electric ran through me. The sentence Blair had thrown across the dinner table months earlier echoed in my head, and for the first time I understood its full weight. It hadn't just hurt me. It had unlocked something my father had deliberately sealed. Harlan proceeded to summarize the estate distribution. He did it clinically without flourish. The majority of assets, including management authority over certain trusts, investment holdings, and decision-making power regarding the primary properties, were designated to me. Not conditionally, not tentatively, directly. I didn't react, not outwardly. I absorbed it like data because that's what it was. My father hadn't promised me a future in private. He'd written it into existence. Blair stood abruptly, the movement sharp enough to scrape her chair against the floor. She spoke fast, voice tight with indignation, waving the concept of DNA like a verdict. She said I wasn't his biological son. She said I had no right. She said the documents should be invalid. Harlan didn't raise his voice. He simply asked her to sit down and said there was more to read. Then he did something that shifted the air in the room completely. He read my father's words written years earlier, stating that he had known from my early childhood that I was not biologically related to him, that he had chosen to raise me anyway, and that his decision to recognize me as his son required no approval or validation from anyone else. The argument Blair was building collapsed in real time. You could see it in the way her jaw tightened, in the way Victor Sloane's posture changed. Biology had been anticipated, documented, and neutralized long before any of us walked into that room. Harlan continued. He referenced materials gathered by a private investigator, Elliot Crane, engaged by my father months before his death. A list was placed on the table: financial records, logs of meetings with multiple law firms, notes documenting pressure exerted during my father's illness, receipts for the purchase of the DNA kit delivered to Blair's address weeks before my birthday. The focus of the room shifted. This was no longer about who I was by blood. It was about who had tried to steer a dying man's decisions. Harlan explained the presence of a clause in the estate documents that penalized any attempt to contest the distribution without substantial cause. Any party initiating such action risked forfeiture of benefits and the immediate calling of outstanding advances or loans. Victor Sloane's face told the story before he said a word. He understood exactly what kind of document this was. This wasn't a mistake or an oversight. It was a structure built to withstand precisely this behavior. Then Harlan reached into the folder and removed a sealed envelope. He didn't hand it to me immediately. He stated that my father had instructed it be delivered only after the presentation of evidence, only to me and only in this context. He placed it on the table in front of me and asked that I wait until the appropriate moment. I looked at the envelope and felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief, recognition. My father hadn't just loved me quietly. He had planned for me. He had protected me in a language I hadn't known how to speak yet. When Harlan finally nodded and indicated I could open the envelope, the room had gone very still. I slid it toward me and broke the seal, carefully aware of every sound. Inside were two documents. One was personal, handwritten. The other was formal, typed, notarized, and dense with legal language. I read the handwritten letter first silently. My father wrote that he had seen how often I was overlooked, how easily I had been dismissed, and how he regretted not having the strength to change the family dynamic while he was alive. He didn't apologize for loving me. He apologized for not protecting me sooner. He said he was leaving me something more important than money, the authority to decide what happened next. The second document explained how that authority worked. It outlined procedures for responding to defamation, intimidation, and interference with my livelihood. It gave the estate's legal representatives discretion to escalate matters if attempts were made to pressure me into withdrawal. Reading it, I understood why my father had been so calm near the end. He hadn't been passive. He had been finished preparing. The document also clarified my status in precise terms. I was identified as a son by recognition and care, not by blood, with a detailed account of my upbringing and my father's role. The language was intentional, designed to leave no room for reinterpretation. Harlan addressed the room again, pointing out discrepancies in financial activity during my father's illness and confirming meetings Blair had held with multiple attorneys. Victor Sloane leaned toward Blair and spoke to her quietly, his tone unmistakable. This was not a fight he could recommend continuing. My mother was asked to confirm basic background details. She said nothing. Her silence filled the room more loudly than any confession. For the first time, she couldn't manage the story. Dana requested that all communications directed at me cease immediately and that any future contact occur through counsel. Harlan confirmed the plan for executing the estate according to schedule with oversight and documentation. Victor Sloane advised his client not to pursue further action. The matter from a legal standpoint was resolved. Later that day, my mother asked to speak with me privately. She wanted to explain. I told her she could tell the truth, but I would not carry it for her anymore. I would not protect lies at the cost of my own life. I didn't promise forgiveness. I promised boundaries. I returned to Portland after everything was finalized, working with Dana to assume my responsibilities methodically. The house in Greenwich became an asset, not a symbol. A line item, not a home. What remained was simpler than I expected. I didn't need shared blood to be a son. I needed one person to choose me and stand by that choice. My father did. From the beginning to the end, he chose me. Before I end this story, I want to pause for a moment. Telling it wasn't easy. It meant reopening wounds I spent years pretending didn't exist. If any part of this resonated with you, feeling invisible, replaced, or questioned in a place that was supposed to feel like home, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments, even just a few words. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about truth boundaries and choosing yourself, please consider subscribing. Sometimes being heard is the first step toward healing.